Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is game 13, World Chess Championship 2024. We remain level. Gukesh with the white pieces this time around opens with e4, and we see another French defense. This is how the match started out. Game 1 saw these exact moves. We deviate from game 1 at this moment here. Game 1, Gukesh played f4, and after c5, knight e2 was played. This time around, it's an immediate knight to e2. White's now in a spot to meet the move in the game, c5, with c3, holding on to his d4 pawn. After knight c6, Gukesh plays a3. Now, if in this position f4 is played, we would have an identical position as game 1. a3 in this game. So let's take a moment here to note some differences with the pawn on a3 rather than f4. What new possibilities might be present for white or black in such a position? This is where Ding went into his first think. Spent about 17 minutes on his next move. He ends up playing in this position bishop to e7. There are other moves to consider. First of all, let me note something quickly here with a3. What is it doing? It's controlling b4. In the event of this tension being released, white doesn't have to worry about a piece jump to follow with knight to b4. This may mean the bishop feels much more secure eventually on the d3 square. Let's consider these three moves, pawn moves. What's happening in each case? If black goes with f6, this has to be weighed carefully. A difference here with the pawn still on home base here, this f pawn still on home base, is that f4 is not yet occupied. So if you're going with f6, there is this knight f4 move, and you better have a good answer to knight takes e6, as well as queen h5. Black does have an answer to these moves. I'll just put on what's considered a top line from here. This capture, Peter says you could go ahead and allow that knight to exist for a move or two. Calls this around even. Black has a lead in development. In an open position like this, the a3 pawn doesn't seem to really be as purposeful. This seems like a position where you would really want to rip your pieces out very quickly. It's a much more dynamic position ahead. Another detail I should note is that after this capture and a check, it's saying king e7 is best. Some line with g6 and the captures on g6, we could enter a messy imbalance knight and two pawns versus a rook. In short, these details all have to be weighed very carefully if black tries to target the head of white's pawn chain, this e5 pawn. Looking at the c4 move in this position, normally you wouldn't want to release this tension like this. However, you could consider making an exception in cases where the b3 square becomes a hole. b3 is a hole as soon as a3 is on board. If c4 was played, we would really be in for a super strategic game. You could very easily see this game run to move 25, 30 without a single pawn or piece capture. A structure like this, white will be looking to play on the side of the board where he has space, the king side, and black will be looking to play on the queen side where black has space. So we could see these moves here for white, and black could really devise a plan around this b3 square, an eventual bishop a4, possible knight jump into b3. Very strategic game ahead should c4 be played. Finally, if we look at a5, which is the move Ding played in response to f4, a5 would not be played with the intention to stop this idea of expanding with b4. a5 would be played with the intention to play a4 and once more look for some pivots on these light squares. In the game, bishop e7 is played. From here, Gukesh plays bishop e3. Now, I just said a moment ago, a5 would not be played to prevent some b4 idea. The reason I'm pointing that out is because b4 in this position would be bad for white. Let me share why. b4 in this position, trying to resolve this tension, black has a good reply to it. Capturing on d4, and now a key move here. If you try a5, it's met with b5, and your knight would be rocked back. However, top move here would be to first fix the b pawn, and next follow up with a5, and this b4 point will collapse. Best play from here is with knight c3. Even in this situation where there are two attackers on the pawn, black could ignore it and still carry on with a5. I'm continuing to make best moves for white. At the end of this continuation, black is the better side. Currently, down a pawn, but will soon win it back. Problem on the c3 knight, and a problem on b4. Black enjoys not only the bishop pair, but a lead in development with such a line. Okay. In this game, we have no b4. It's after bishop e7, bishop e3. Knight b6 is Ding's idea. He has an eye on c4. Bit more appealing, the c4 square, now that the knight is obstructing the bishop. Bishop's eyes opened. And the follow-up here, the knight dives straight into c4. I should note, rather than knight f4, if you're capturing on c5, that would be a great error. Knight c4. After this capture on c5, knight c4 is there, and black will be winning the pawn back. It even considers this position already winning for black, so you cannot try to win some material there. It's knight f4. Black continues with the capture on d4, and from here, knight c4 is played. In the computer's eyes, it says, don't be so quick to dive into c4. It's leaning more towards bishop d7, the only bishop move available. I guess in a way, there's some potential benefit in putting the bishop on d7. You may be saying, as black, I would prefer to see this bishop make a move before I dive into that c4 square. So, for instance, if you go with bishop d7 and the bishop goes to d3 now, much more appealing to dive in. 2 tempi will be expended before that knight is eliminated. Additionally, if white continues developing the knight to f3 here, you don't have to now worry about maybe a queen g4 move. Speaking of queen g4, if queen g4 is played here, you could go with g6 to defend this threat. You don't necessarily have to castle kingside. Kingside castles can be a very risky location for the king for as long as this guy, the light square bishop, is still around. There's even situations without a light square bishop it could be dangerous, but with the light square bishop on this diagonal, queen on g4, very risky for black. Queen g4, g6. I've even seen a line where black would go queenside castles. That is not out the window. All right, in this game, no bishop to d7. Knight c4, bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop. Big imbalance now, 2 imbalances. Majority for black on the queen side, bishop pair for black, light square bishop. If you get some moves in like this, fantastic diagonal, watches over a d5 break. White's taking that into account at this moment here. He plays knight g to e2. He has an eye on the d5 square. He wants to put the knight, the king knight, on this queenside square, c3. At any moment, there could be a d5 break. The knights coordinate really well on that square. If in this position, rather than the move in the game, knight g to e2, if queen g4 is played, there's a really sharp line here with queen to g4. You have to do your calculation really well here if you're playing queen to g4, because there would be a check forcing the bishop back, and now queen b6. You better have an answer to these two problems. The line continues something like this, defending the pawn with knight to e2, queen b2, there's bishop c3, now with the knight on e2 rather than f3. It's not the end of this continuation. This is considered better for white. Star move there with bishop d3 gets this pawn back. The queen is unprotected, the pawn is pinned to the queen in this position. It goes a bit deeper. I've seen a line where eventually there's a bishop on d7. This guy falls and queenside castles is on board. Good luck assessing that position. Very scary, I would say, for Team Black. All right, you have to do your homework on that crazy line. We do not have this aggressive queen g4 in this case. It is knight g to e2, b5, going with the majority, opening up a square for the bishop, white castles, black castles, knight c3, rook b8 to defend the pawn. Follow up, knight h5. How would you continue here as black? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. What move would you play here? Okay, in the game, we have f5. This last move, knight h5, definitely has to be respected. This is not a moment where you say to yourself, well, I have a majority. Let me go advance my majority. a5, with the idea of b4, you would already be lost. You have to take into account this aggressive knight targeting the heart of the kingside structure. It would be winning for white after queen g4. What would be your answer to this mate threat? g6 is the only way to defend, but now there would be a huge gap created on f6. Knight e4, and guess what? A white knight will be established on that sensitive square. Winning position for white. So black has to factor in this queen g4 move with the dangerous queen knight over here, now on h5. Black's play is with f5. There are slower approaches. The computer says you could afford to play these slower moves, king h8, and then you have this move, rook g8, not touching this pawn, not creating this gap on the f6 square when you play g6. It goes a little bit further from here, some queen f3, targeting the knight and a pawn. There's knight takes d4 in that case. This needs to be weighed very carefully. Ding does not take this slower approach, shifting the king and rook over. He goes with f5. That certainly cuts out, for the moment, queen g4. Follow up here, we have the capture en passant. Playing this in a different way, you could go with the d5 break. You could see a queen exchange shortly thereafter. If you play this position in a slower fashion as white, if you allow this pawn to exist, let's say you take this moment out to flick in a flight square, there is this nice little idea here for black to go for a rook lift, b7, and then next up, d7. White could come under some serious pressure soon in the center. I've even seen a line where after knight to f4, there's a crazy g5 move thrown in. That would certainly make for a wild game ahead. I wouldn't be surprised to see the rook pivoting over on the g7 or f7 square at some stage. Some pawn breaks with g4 or f4, very lively position This pawn here, not allowed to exist. It's captured. Bishop takes f6. And from here, queen f3. Got some pressure on the knight. In the game, it's queen to e8. This was a big moment in the game. Move 17 here for white. He plays queen to e8. You could get away here with this capture on d4. This would need to be weighed carefully. Knight takes d4 is the top move. And I'm going to show you a cool tactic here. See how this plays out. After knight takes bishop, in this case, you can't take with the queen. If you take with the queens are exchanged. And in the end, you lose a piece. So you would have to take with the rook, throwing a punch at the queen. But here's the question. With this line here, after the move queen g3, it looks good, maybe on the surface for white. Threatening the rook. Pressure on the knight. Restriction on the queen. Possible pin on that knight. And a skewer. But in this position, black has one move that wins for black. Everything else would be losing. Let me throw this variation to you, this hypothetical. As a pop quiz, what would be the winning move here? The only winning move? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, the queen and king are on the same file. Black can use this to his advantage. Knight f3 is the only move here that wins for black. Black says, you take my knight, I will soon take your queen. And if you save your king, I can play bishop b7. Rook is defended, and this knight is still poison. You take the knight, the bishop can take, and we will yet again win the queen. So that's a sharp line right here. You could, in other words, in this position right here as black, move 17, take on d4. But you have to spot that later move, knight f3. In this game, it's queen e8, defending the knight. Some pressure on this guy. Knight for bishop exchange. Queen e2. Yeah, probably not a wise choice to keep the queen over here. You're asking for potential tempo. Right around the corner, there's this coordinated idea with the rook and bishop on b7. So she takes a step back. Queen e2 it is. Queen g6. f3, very healthy move for many reasons. Anticipating any pressure here. You're also opening up a square for the bishop. Very nice coordination at this stage. You're also, as white, supporting a knight jump into e4. This turns out to be a very dangerous piece for the white side here, Gukesh. Rook f8 in this game. Rook a d1, knight e7. Looking at a couple jumps. Bishop f4. This was a really interesting moment in the game, I have to say, because I watched this game live, as I have done with all of the games so far. This moment here, yeah, really interesting. Move 22. Bishop f4. That move was played before Ding Liren even wrote down his move knight e7. Players write down the notation on their score sheet. Kind of, Ding ended up doing like a little double take, like, you kidding me? You already moved? Yep. A move was blitzed out here, bulleted out in just a couple seconds. What were we at? 31 minutes, 1 second? Yeah, 1 second to pull that move off. Ding's reply, rook to b6, and yet again, bullet mode, 2 seconds for bishop c7 before it ends up deciding on a square. He's trying to influence this rook position, interfere with the bishop's development in a way. Rook b7 is played here, still staying trained on the b5 square. This guy is now in the way of the bishop development on the long diagonal. Another bulleted move, 2 seconds for that one, bishop to d6. So those last three moves, boom, 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 bullet mode for Gukesh. Ding didn't even get a chance to write his move down before those replies. Pressure situation, for sure. We're 24 moves in. Ding only has less than 20 minutes here. A lot of pressure being applied here to black, these next handful of moves. Rook e8, out of a pin. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes bishop. Knight versus bishop imbalance. Very dangerous knight. Knight d6, knight c5 moves right around the corner. Queen e5, defensive b5, d5 break. Pawn takes, queen takes with check, offering a queen exchange. From here, queen c5, and rook to e8. This was a huge moment in the game. Rook to e8 was an only move. There's a dangerous idea here for white. Let me make what appears to be a very sensible move. h6, producing a flight square. This would be losing now. Not because of rook e8, or rook d8 check. Rook d8 check, black could withdraw the rook, and the bishop will be secure. Some pressure on that point already, a restriction on the queen here. If black played h6 here, instead of the move in the game, rook e8, the winning idea here for white would be to take a pit stop right here on d6, trying to influence this queen from its defense of the bishop. After queen f5, now you could go into d8, and there is not rook e8 to defend. These two are no longer coordinated on the e8 square. White will soon win the bishop. Now is not the moment to insert a flight square. Only move, withdraw this rook. Some defense now over black's back rank. Under 10 minutes to go, still more than 10 moves to be played here. Next move, 30, rook d to e1. A mistake here by Ding. He ends up playing queen f7. The best move in this position for white is to exchange rooks. What was best for Ding in this position? Very difficult to maybe pull off these moves, especially approaching time control. Only 8 minutes and change at this stage. Considered best is to go for the two rooks. And black would end up having to make some defensive moves here. There's a problem here, a problem there. This is one of the defensive moves. And after knight to e4, black would have to come up with another only move here, rook e7. And if white continues now with knight d6, the only move here for black is this idea to bother the queen, try and release this pressure on the bishop, keeping this check in reserve in some cases. Continuation from here, queen c6. It's saying, put your rook here. Queen c7, put your rook here. This idea is to continually bother the queen to release this pressure on the bishop. That would be very difficult, I believe, for Ding Liren to come up with approaching this move 40 time control. He does not go for the two rooks for the queen imbalance in this game. After rook d to e1, Ding plays queen f7, move 30. And Gukesh has an excellent continuation here, but he does not spot it. Best in this position is knight to e4. In the game, it's rook captures rook with then knight to e4. What's the difference? Well, by first exchanging a pair of rooks, the back rank is a bit more vulnerable to black. Let's see what this best continuation looks like. Rook takes rook, queen takes, rook, and now knight to e4. Big problem. This knight would be hitting everything here on black's end. And what are you supposed to do here? This is a losing position. This would be a losing position here for black. A monster knight arrives on d6. There's no problem in this case with the capture on c8. Take the knight. Capturing in the other direction with the knight, there's rook c7 to regain the piece based on the fork. The problem, though, is that this king is exposed. There's a check on d5. And if you're going into the corner, that's not even considered best. If you go to the corner, rook e1 is considered best. Back rank problems. If you take twice on this d6 square, there's going to be a back rank mate. King f8. There's a check here, queen e6, king here, and now you could take timeout to make a nice defensive move. This knight is going nowhere. This knight far superior than the light square bishop here. This is a winning position for white. Exposed king, just monster knight. You're not surviving this. Rook up and over ideas. He does not find this best continuation. He does not first exchange a pair of rooks at this moment. He goes with an immediate knight to e4. Why not exchange a pair of rooks? What might be the mentality there? Well, there's a super attractive fork here, hitting all major pieces, 4 pieces. How is black going to survive this knight d6 move? Black yet again finds himself in an only move situation. Move 31, and he finds it. Rook f8 played. What's the story after knight d6? Let's find out. That's the move in the game. There's still a fork on board. Black has a move, though, another only move. Rook c7, counterpunching, saying, you take my queen, I take your queen. We continue with queen e5, and now queen to f6. What's the story now if knight e8 is played in this game? What we have on board is the check on d5. If knight e8, black would have a way out of this fork. Board vision required. Queen over here, landing a check, and you can next move the rook out of danger. All right, no knight e8 here. Queen d5 check. That is move 34. Only about 4 minutes left for Ding, 7 for Gukesh. King h8, rook e5. Now, rook e7. We're getting a pair of rooks off. Approaching move 40 time control. Finally, some time can be taken out for a flight square. Queen c5, bishop d7, safeguarding that guy. There were 2 attackers on the bishop. Knight e4, queen f4, and after rook e7, move 40 has been met there for Gukesh. Ding still had a couple minutes in the tank. He ends up deciding on bishop to f5. Finally, we have got to time control. It was a very tense several moves there, meeting that 40th move. 30-second increment kicks in, bonus time added, 30 minutes. Okay, where do we go from here? It's queen d4, nice central post, defending b2 against any queen c1, queen b2 moves. Also, we got a mate in 1 threat. There's only 1 move. Easy enough to spot here, especially now that he has some time. Rook g8, the only move to defend. And from here, flight square for white. Queen c1 check, king f2. That pesky knight finally eliminated. We are now in a major piece specific ending. And with this continuation c3, Ding is looking to simply liquidate into a rook and pawn ending, even if it comes to a scenario where it's 3 versus 2 on the king side and white has no passed pawns. That should be a fairly easy hold for the draw by black. White's continuation is with pawn captures on c3, and then the a-pawn falls. If queen takes c3, just to show you how we could get to the 3 versus 2 situation, this is going to be a problem. How are you defending it? If you go with rook to e3, black will have rook c4 and then a4. You're not going to be able to defend the a-pawn. And if in this position you go on the offensive with rook to e6, black has a5. And if you go after the a-pawn, there's a4. And we'll soon be looking at a position where black still has a pawn on the queen side. Completely balanced material. So Gukesh still playing this position on. He wants to keep queens on board. She is a really well-positioned piece, constantly observing that g7 pawn, or really I should say, pinning that g7 pawn. With some attention to that pin, we have to realize this guy may be a target in some cases. Rook h6 could be a mate threat idea. In this game, c3 is met with b takes c3, queen takes a3. We now have a passed pawn, but super active white pieces here. This guy's passive, the rook on g8, advances the passed pawn, rook b7, and from here we have queen c4, advancing with the b pawn. What's going to happen? These pawns will all be exchanged, but the queens will remain. If these guys are all going to be exchanged, the pawns here on the queen side, black would like to have the queens exchanged in the process. And we enter that 3 versus 2 on the king side. White with no passed pawns. It should be easy enough to hold that one. The try here is with queen c4. And the follow-up, queen to e5. White once more ducking the queen exchange. If you go for the queen exchange, yes, this c pawn can be won. But this guy gets to this ideal square behind the passed pawn. And this rook will have the responsibility to blockade. Not a fun position. Black can always abandon defense of this pawn, go after the c pawn, chop, chop, and we're entering into that 3 versus 2 drawn rook and pawn ending with just kingside specific pawns. No queen exchange in this game right here after queen c4. It is queen to e5. Follow up now, queen c6. There is a way you could go wrong here. If it's black, you go with b4. There is this sneaky idea to capture on b4 first, and now rook to b6, setting up the checkmate in 1 threat based on this pawn being pinned. How do you get out of this situation? A move the computer says you could play is king to h7, but notice this is an opportunity now for white to exchange queens. Yes, we would have a 3 versus 2 majority here. Difference here, we have a passed pawn. So this is not as easy a hold as with the pawn on f, on the f file. Passer, much more dangerous situation, much more difficult situation for black to hold. So he is aware of this possibility. Ding, not playing b4 just yet. He goes with rook c6. In the game, queen takes b5 is played. If rook takes b5, now there isn't this pressure, coordinated pressure on b6. No rook b6, capture on h6 idea. This passer can get running. And if black tries to get behind the pawn, now this rook could get behind. So something like this, yes, white would be up a pawn still, but this is all about pawn quality. This is a very dangerous passed pawn. Well supported by the queen. This queen will soon have to be a blockader. Not ideal. White definitely doesn't want to go into this situation. So, what do we have after queen c6. It is queen takes b5, and we end up trading all queenside pawns. We're able to get the queens off in this game, and now it is the 3 versus 2 on the king side. No passed pawns here for white. What is the try in this ending now? Keep pressure on something. Pressure on the g2 pawn. These guys here in general should just sit. You don't have to move them. If you could be assured h6 and g6, king h6, just shift the position slightly. That's a way you can approach it, or just keeping it as is. You don't have to move either pawn. A word of caution here, if you do go with some pawn move, let's say g6 is played, this is not a good idea for many reasons. You're exposing your king to checks. King is forced to the back rank, not ideal. But I want to just point out a way that we could have some pawn exchange by pushing that g pawn up just one step. There's maybe this potential to exchange the h pawn for the g pawn now. It's not forced, there's g5 here, but just to illustrate, we could now have a situation where white has a passed pawn. We should not be so quick to allow white a passed pawn. If this guy is kept back, as long as this guy, the g pawn, is always around, it doesn't matter which one of these pawns are still around, none of them will be passed. This is the most important pawn, so he should, this pawn here should be kept back. All right, plan here, keep pressure on something. Black king improved a little bit. We get some checks in here. G pawn up a rank. We're back to putting pressure on it. h4. And some checks thrown in here. Now h5 is in, some direct play towards the end here. After h5, if king takes pawn, I'm just losing this guy straight away. And now the king is cut off. The extra pawn white has can't even move. White is actually stuck here. I'd be a little bit more concerned about playing the white side here with the king having so few options. He does not take on h5 here. He goes with king to f4, another check thrown in, king f3. If you once more try to go after the h-pawn, there would be rook g4 check, and once more, not a situation you really want to be in as white. So we keep this rook activity, rook c4, king f3, another check, king f4, and we end up just repeating here, and this one, his game 13, ends peacefully. This was quite the game here, I must say. Really, really tense. If you happen to catch this live, you know I'm talking about really meeting that move 40 time control. Really something special, I feel. These only moves Ding had to play in many cases. It was not easy to work around that monster white knight on d6, but he found a way out of that. So we remain level with one more classical game to go. What did you think of this one? Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.